Good evening, this is Mrs. Ellsworth. So this is where we left off from part one of our physical property classification unit. And so now we're going to be talking about physical properties, chemical properties, physical changes, and chemical changes. So physical properties are characteristics that we use to identify things. Like when we were doing our density test, we were first of all doing a physical property of density, and we're using that to identify those different metals that we were working with when we did the density tests on those cylinders of metal. Anyway, a density test is just one physical property that we could use to identify them. Other things that, like you guys would even ask me, well, which metal is this? And I would look at it by how heavy it was, to know whether it was steel or whether it was aluminum. I would also look at it to see what color it was, to know if it was brass or if it was copper. Those type of things are all physical properties, which are characteristics that help us identify different substances. They even do that with people. What height are you? How much do you weigh? What color are your eyes? What color is your hair? So those are all physical properties of us that we use to identify each other. Here are some other examples of physical properties, like viscosity. That's pouring honey. It's very slow. Conductivity. Does it conduct electricity? If you stick some electric probes in it, will it conduct electricity? Malleability. That's hammering out things so that they can be squished into certain shapes. Hardness. If they're too hard, they won't do that. Melting point. Water has got a melting point of 0 degrees Celsius or else a freezing point of 0 degrees Celsius. Those are things that help us identify it. Boiling point, 100 degrees Celsius helps us identify water. Alcohol is 82 degrees Celsius. Density. And we already know several densities from the long lab that we just completed. Here are some more properties, and you can go in and pause it now and look at some more of these. We're not going to go through those. I'm going to go through some specific ones here in just a minute, like viscosity and malleability and so on. So here, go ahead and pause it and look at this. I'm going to move on to the viscosity though. Viscosity is like the slowness of a substance from pouring out. It has a lot of resistance and friction between the molecules, so it's slow at pouring. Malleability is another one. All this jewelry that's on here has been hammered out or else been squished in certain shapes, and so that means that it will be squished instead of being brittle and breaking apart. So what physical properties could you use to go and identify water? Lots of students say it's wet, and wet is not a very good term for it. So think of other things and pause it here for a minute and try and list 3 of them. When I think of water, I think that it's clear and it's colorless. It's a liquid. Okay, and then I can also think about the boiling point and the freezing point to help identify it. It also is not very viscous. Lots of us think that water conducts electricity really well, but it doesn't when it's pure water. It doesn't conduct electricity very well. It's when it's got other things dissolved in it, and that's when it does start to conduct electricity well. And also we know that water's got a density of 1. Now, we're going to be watching a video here tomorrow, and then you'll be going and talking about the different methods that we use to separate different mixtures, but we already know several. We know filtering. We know evaporation. We know, we also know magnetism. So those are just some of them. There are more, and we'll talk about those in our video that we watch tomorrow. Now, we talked about physical properties. Let's talk about chemical properties. Now, when you talk about chemical properties, you think about, well, does this metal, does it oxidize? Does it rust? Okay, if you're making something that you want to be strong, then you want some type of knowledge of that metal. For example, this chain right here is rusting, but I mean, if it's really thick metal, it'll take a long time to rust through. Also, if you're looking at some liquids, I mean, are they flammable? Can you have them near a flame? Those are types of chemical properties. Now notice it says the ability to produce a change in the composition of matter. Well, it has the ability to do it, but it's not going through the change. So you kind of got to look through things and see into the future. Can this oxidize? Will this react with something? Like acids, they react with metals. And so those are things that you can think about with that. So here's a quiz for you. Go and circle all the ones that are physical properties on your sheet and put a rectangle around the ones that are chemical properties. And we'll check this in class. The next thing we're going to talk about are the two different types of changes. Okay? Physical changes and chemical changes. Now, a physical change, it happens when you go and you cut something up, you freeze it, you boil it. It happens when you smush it up or take a piece of paper and go and crunch it all up together into a big wad ball there. Those are physical changes. So examples are freezing water, evaporating water, chopping wood is still pieces of wood, those wood chips are. Okay, crumpling up your piece of paper is still paper. It hasn't went through a change. Now, if you'd burn it, that'd be a chemical change. But if you're crumpling up, then it is just a physical change. Cutting your hair. The hair that's laying on the floor is still hair. And chemical changes are different, like what I was talking about. If you go and burn that paper, that is a chemical change. So a chemical change occurs when a substance reacts and forms a different substance, a completely different substance. Okay? And so sometimes when you have a chemical reaction occur, it'll change colors. That shows evidence of a chemical change. Sometimes it'll bubble up and it'll make gas. Like when you go and stick baking soda in with vinegar, it makes gas. And so when that happens, you know that it's went through a chemical change. It's produced carbon dioxide gas. Now the formation of a precipitate is really cool. You put two clear colorless liquids together and sometimes you can get a white precipitate, like it's snowing inside, it's getting cloudy inside the test tube, or it'll settle down to the bottom so it kind of looks like it's snowing inside of there. So I want you to quiz yourself now. This is another one that I'll check tomorrow to make sure that you're on the right track of this. And so decide when you're going through these, does it change the composition of what you're looking at completely to a completely different thing? Then it's chemical change, and put a rectangle around it. Does it not change the composition? Is it still the same stuff? Is it like cutting your hair where the hair is sitting on the countertop or whatever? It's still hair. So think about it. Did it change what it is? Did it change its composition? Because then that would tell you whether it is a physical change or a chemical change. So quiz yourself. We'll go over this tomorrow. And I will see you later. Bye.